Welcome to The Apologist and welcome back to our classes on marriage and divorce. In this class, we're going to talk about what Jesus talked about relative to, in the beginning, there was no divorce. In the beginning, marriage was made where the two would become one. In the beginning, Adam and Eve were one. And we want to talk about that because it was the original intent of God in marriage that the husband and wife would joyfully be together forever and that their love would be fulfilled and they would pour into each other's lives and become one life. And so this is what the idea of marriage is throughout the Bible, in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. In our previous lessons, we discussed and we focused and we isolated those things that were said by Jesus pertaining to the Jews under the Old Testament. And we explained why they were not exactly applicable to the New Testament doctrine on marriage and divorce. But at the same time, we reach back to what Jesus said about, and from the beginning it wasn't so, and that is universal. And we do carry that idea and those principles over into New Testament marriages. It is for all ages, the image of God, that the husband and wife would be one and they would stay together. They'd be as happy as me and my wife if everybody was going according to the scripture. And so what we're going to try to do is explain why we say that the things Jesus said concerning the marriage laws of the Old Testament are not applicable, directly applicable to the New Testament church, and how the concept that a marriage is forever is applicable in the New Testament church. Thank you for joining us today on Divine Marriage Relationships, and we're talking about divorce, marriage, and remarriage after divorce. Thank you very much for joining us. This is also a video that is included in the class on marriage and divorce at the International Association Apostolic Apologists Institute of Theology. This would be one of the classes that you can use for credit. Thank you very much, and God bless you. Yes, in this particular class, I want to talk about the law, how under the law, the effort of God under the law to help the Jewish husbands to live in the image of what marriage was in the beginning. In the beginning, as Jesus said in Matthew 19:6, in the beginning and through 8, in the beginning it wasn't so. God made Adam and Eve, male and female, husband and wife, and the two became one flesh. And what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. The image is that a husband and wife will be together forever. And so that is the image that is set forth and an example to us from the very beginning. And that is the image that under the law of Moses, God was trying to guide them by the law to live within that image, that the husbands would not divorce their wives. There will be no divorce. And let me explain to you that in the beginning there was no divorce. The example that we have in Genesis chapter 2 of God putting Adam and Eve together as husband and wife, there was no provisions for divorce. Why was there no provisions for divorce? Because in the beginning, before the fall of Adam, divorces were impossible. They were impossible. The original purpose of God was that man would love his wife forever and they would be one, and there was nothing in God's putting them together that said, in case you divorce. That was impossible. So what Jesus was saying was from the very beginning, it was impossible for one to divorce. The original image of God was that they would be together forever. And that original image was an image that was copied from the planned image of God, that God and man through the church would be together forever in eternity. And so the church is actually, as Paul said, is a picture of God and his church and the love of God for his church. And separation actually violates that image of that plan of God for man to be one with God, inseparable eternally. And so to break that image is to break the image of what God intended for eternity with the man via the church being glorified and the church being the bride of Christ. And so it was always God's image and purpose in the beginning that man and his wife would be one. But after the fall of Adam, when Adam was driven out of the Garden of Eden because of his sin, then the natural inseparability of marriage was lost in the fall. Not like before. After the fall, it was not just natural for a man to love his wife and for it to happen naturally. Adam loved his wife and Eve loved her husband, and if they flowed together naturally because God made them that way and they just flowed that way, it was like a downhill journey for them as far as having momentum in loving one another and being one. It was no effort involved. It was natural. It was a gift of God. It was a pleasure. And the marriage to Adam and Eve was a utopia of love and unity and a flow that was nothing like we will ever see in this world, nothing we have ever seen. The natural flow of of Adam and Eve in that love in the Garden of Eden, that natural flow was a flow that came natural for Adam and Eve. It was a natural thing. It was not even possible for them to separate. So as Jesus said, from the beginning, it wasn't so. It wasn't even possible before the fall. But after the fall, then man's nature became very, very corrupt. And even the blessedness of marriage now was to only be obtained by effort and by intent and by teaching. All of these classes we have on how to love your husband, how to love your wife, that wasn't anything that you had to go to in Adam's world. That came natural. You didn't have to have marriage seminars, and you didn't have to have a marriage counseling, and the husband didn't have to struggle to love his wife due to temptations and all kinds of things, maybe weaknesses in his flesh and weaknesses in her flesh. Those things came about as a result of the fall of Adam. And so the image in the Old Testament and in the New Testament is the image of man being one with his wife before the fall. And that's what we're trying to get back to. In every dispensation, under the dispensation of the law and the dispensation of the church, grace age, both are trying to get back to the original image and trying to guide the people to the original image. Guide the people who are married to the original image. The image of the oneness that the husband and wife have, the love that the husband and wife have, the inseparability, which was the image of God pertaining to God and his church, and that God wanted man to have to enjoy in life. Marriage is one of the most enjoyable things in this world. But it was even better than what it is now before the fall. But we never got to that point because of the fall. And the fallen nature of man has caused God to have to do some things. After the fall, as described in Genesis 3:24, Adam was driven out of the Garden of Eden. He lost his special place. Now his relationships are going to be challenged. Instead of his love flowing naturally, now it's going to be a challenge. Now he's going to begin to see things in Eve that he had never seen before. Eve is going to begin to see things in Adam that she never seen before. And infractions and divisions are possible now. Even the idea of them being separate is possible now. And so now what we are doing in the New Testament era, and as they did in the Old Testament era, we're living in a world where the relationship of marriage has been damaged and has been put in a category of a struggle to get the pleasures of it. It's like a rose bush. You may end up with thorns and cuts with thorns and things of that nature in order to get to pick one rose and to be able to enjoy it. So whatever we do, we have to all be watchful and have to be careful that we have love, uninhibited love, one for another in our marriage lives. But after the fall, it has become a struggle. And so what happened in Genesis chapter 3, verse number 17 through 25 is affected and still upon us today. And we are now living in a world where marriage is a challenge to enjoy, but we can enjoy it. And so what I'm doing here is to laying down the foundation to explain scriptures like St. Matthew's Gospel, chapters 19, 1 through 9, where Jesus talks about marriage and divorce. And what I'm going to do is I'm trying to explain to you the difference between the laws of marriage under the Old Testament law and the principles of marriage, which were back in the beginning. If we want to say by dispensation, in the dispensation of innocence or in the time of Adam before the fall, there were certain things that were in place before the fall, and then there are certain things that were in place after the fall and because of the fall. The things that were in place before the fall were the things that Jesus mentioned in St. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 19, verse 6 and through 8, where he talked about the inseparability of marriage from the beginning. And the things after the fall were those things that Jesus talked about in St. Matthew's 19, down, I think, after verse 8, where he began to talk about the law of Moses. And what we're doing here is we're showing that the law of Moses was the law that was set up because of the infractions of men, because of the weakness of men. God gave, through Moses, a bill of divorcement. And so that the husbands who were mistreating their wives and abusing their wives could release their wives from the marriage because the marriage was no good, and these men were putting their wives without divorcing them, and they could claim that they were still their wives, and the ladies couldn't get married again. It was a horrible thing. But God, through his mercy, divorce is actually an act of mercy set up by God for abused wives. It was not God's original intent that they would have to separate. But because of the damage of the fall that is so obviously displayed under the dispensation of the law, as particular in our lesson through the Pharisees, God said that it would be better to allow them to divorce, even though a divorce is an infraction of the image. So divorce came about because of the fall of Adam, and it was the law's effort to protect the women. But the law that Jesus mentioned, the laws of the Old Testament that said that there should be no divorce, was there in the for the purpose of preserving the original image, the image of the inseparability of a marriage. So in the dispensation of the law, there were certain things that were written in the law that preserved the inseparability of the principle of the inseparability of the marriage, and the principle that there would be no separation, because the separation and divorce would be an infraction of the image of God that he tried to show in Adam and in Eve. As we read in Matthew chapter 19, in verse number 6, wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh, speaking of husband and wife. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. They said unto him, why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement, and to put her away? He said unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your heart, suffered you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whosoever marrieth her which is put away, doth commit adultery. In other words, Jesus is telling these Pharisees, we got to preserve the image of marriage, or the purpose of marriage, of a husband and wife forever, until death do them part. Not in fractions, but until death does them part. So under the law, here the rule is that it's written in the law that those men under the law could not divorce their wives for any privilege, any purpose. They couldn't even get away from their wives, even unless it would be cause of fornication. And here fornication has to do with death. It has to do with death because the fornication here is referring to adultery, which was under the law. Adultery meant that a person would be stoned to death, according to Deuteronomy 22. The person would be stoned to death. And note you hear that Deuteronomy 22 about the stoning to death was really the only way out of a marriage back then, not divorce. But it was adultery was a cause under the law to be stoned to death. And that law of adultery, people being stoned for adultery, came before the law of divorce. The law of divorce was not connected with adultery. The law of divorce was connected with the cruelty of men. So before the law of divorce came in Deuteronomy 24, there was a law of adultery in Deuteronomy 22, where the adulteress would be put to death. Because this was such an infraction against the image of God, for somebody to cross over and violate the sacredness of the marriage was worthy of death. And so, but all of these provisions were provisions that were given under the law after the fall. And so Jesus says from the beginning it wasn't so. Yes, because that was in the dispensation of grace, innocence, before the fall. The law is under the dispensation of law, where the flesh is actually potent. And the weakness of men are there. So the laws that were written under the Old Testament were laws that were written applicable to the Old Testament in its context. And so those are laws that are striving to get man to, in his marriage, follow that original image of inseparability. And so it was more a sin in Jesus' day to commit adultery, and it was also then provided for them in Deuteronomy 24 for the protection of women, for the husbands to divorce their wives. In other words, this law of divorce was cut the woman off and let her go if you don't want her, and stop mistreating her. It was for that purpose only. It was not because of adultery. Adultery had its own penalty, which was death, and that whole system there. So, under the Old Testament, the efforts were to go back to the original image. All right. Now, in the New Testament, the efforts of the apostle in all of his teachings was to get us back to the original image. And all the scriptures that talk about being together in the book of 1 Corinthians 7, 1 through 10, I believe it is, was talking about not separating. Ephesians 5, 21 and down, not separating, loving your wives as Christ loved the church, to abide and to live according to the image of the eternal oneness of God that shall come. Peter, dealing with your wives as a weaker vessels, and then Timothy, keeping the husband and wife together. Adam came before Eve in 2 Timothy 2, I believe it was. And all of the scriptures in the New Testament are principles to keep the union together. In the Old Testament and in Matthew's, they are laws. The laws that are designed and applicable to Israel, which may not be applicable to the church. We can copy from the principles that are taught in the Matthew's 19, but we do not take them as law to judge cases in the church using those laws, because those laws are not applicable to the church in that sense. But they have in common the fact that they both are trying to preserve the original image. So then marriage, divorce is an infraction, whether it's in the Old Testament or the New Testament. It is not a divorce. Should not be considered a sin unless someone did it in a malicious way. But for those who have fallen under the weakness of a spouse or a partner that drove them into divorce that they never did really want, those people are not living in sin. Those people are the victims of the fall and what it did to many people's marriages. And I would say that we should not preach that people are in trouble with God because they had a divorce. They should be mistreated because they got a divorce. But what we should do is we should explain to them that it is an infraction, and that we should pray for them because they're suffering something they didn't really want to go through. So this is the reason why we're explaining why I say that the Old Testament system is not applicable. The principles of the original principles are applicable to all dispensations, but those principles and the laws and rules of marriage and divorce in the Old Testament under Moses that Jesus referred to in Matthew 19, Matthew 5, Mark 10 are not applicable as laws in the New Testament church. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll have another lesson coming up. Is divorce a sin? God bless you, and thank you for joining in today. Thank you for joining us on the Divine Marriage Relationship. This is the apologist, discussing biblical rules and principles of marriage and divorce. In this lesson, we tried to show that the things that Jesus said under the law of Moses, pertaining to the law of Moses, relative to marriage and divorce, were under the Old Testament, and the things that Paul said were under the principles of the New Testament. Thank you very much, and God bless you.